Hey, and welcome to this new series I have planned, first of hopefully many, of game art. So basically the idea was, I've had other series on the go, the Zbrush quickies and some modeling series and that, but I thought it'd be a good idea to start a game art series where, long and short videos, multi-parts, quick tips, basically just tutorials and tips. Things I picked up myself over the years, and about game asset workflow. And there's a lot of people that are confused with the whole process because there's a lot involved, a lot to learn, a lot of tools, so many applications these days, so many different ways of doing things. So I thought it'd be a good idea for to sort of just cover random sort of stuff, whenever pops into my head, or even I can take requests and things like that. I have been crazy busy lately, working 65-hour weeks and whatnot, so I haven't had a huge amount of time to make as many videos as I would like to be making. So what I'm going to start with here is this Atari 2600 joystick. Now hopefully there's a few people watching that are as old as I am and actually remember this, even though I was a kid. This was the very first joystick, no pun intended, I ever got my hands on. I know, in fact, it wasn't that, well, it was joystick wise. There was a kind of a weird Pong thing before that. I was only a very, very young child. It was like a Pong paddle wheelie sort of. I think it was the first home computer or whatever. But anyway, this was the 2600 joystick, and this was sort of the prototype for many joysticks to come. I had a Commodore 64 when I was younger, and looking, searching for these joystick references brought back a few good memories of and a few bad ones. Those crazy games back in the day where you had to make a bloke do something by going left to right as fast as you could with the joystick. Combat skill was one I remember, and bloody, you nearly pull the fucking yoke out of the base. But that was gaming back in the golden years of joysticks and 8-bit graphics and 16K of RAM. If people can even, you've text files now with more kilobytes in it. But anyways, on with the show. So yeah, I'm going to use Zmodeler for this. I often get questions about, oh, can you not just it's easier to do it in Maya and blah 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 and Max, whatever. Fair enough, yeah, I can do it there, but I mainly do these Zbrush videos because I like to just show. Not everybody has a 3D package, even though if you're interested in game art, you really should. It's usually the hub for where, well, I do everything in Max as a hub. Everything works through Max for the pipeline or the workflow. But anyway, I'm rambling on way too much here, so I'm going to get started. And the first thing I'm going to model in this is the base here. Start off nice and simple. With a quick cube, so I'm not going to go over the basics. I did put up a ZBrush Zmodeler video there just earlier on today in sort of preparation for this, like a primer kind of to get you going. So I'm going to be Zmodeling this joystick, so just so people kind of have an idea, you might want to watch that video. So the quick tools I explained in that video as well. You come down to initialize. Here they are here. They're just sort of optimized primitives to get you going with Zmodeler. So they're in this initialize menu. I have obviously got them on my UI. So I'm just going to click quick cube, and I'll just start us off with this basic cube. And I'm going to switch to skin shade and a nice bright color, because I like to be visually pleased when I work. So into the front view, so we know where we're at. X to turn on symmetry, and you can see front view will have you across the x-axis, left to right. So it's nice to get oriented, and for that, a previous video I did there, the script video. I believe it is which one? Yo, axis tool position, yeah. So check out that video, useful ZBrush plugins. So I just have a hotkey set to F, and that'll always bring me back to the front view, so I always know where I am. And T for top view, same as 3D Max, just so I know, you know, you could be all over the place and not know where you are, or what axis you want to be using for some of these tools. So I can just hit F all the time and know exactly where I am. If I turn on the floor, I can see the little red line is X, Y is always up in ZBrush. So let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do, Zmodeler, and I'm just going to Alt to get rid of that loop through there, and then select the transpose line, and then I'm just going to snap to this vert, anchor it, and then hold down Shift and drag, and then the outer circle, I'm just going to bring it up to the thickness that I want. So let's say that's where I want it, and we can play with this later on, it's no big deal. Now the other way I could have done that, instead of getting the transpose line and all, a very quick way to do that is just get the clip curve brush, and you can just clip the geometry. And when you're working on very simple geo like this, it's dead handy to use, because it's not going to mash all the geometry together as it would do on high res meshes, as it does do, because there's so little topology that it's easy for it to work out where to put that topology when you mash it up with clip curve. So I'm going to go into the top view, and I'm going to start here by just chamfering these four corners. So if I press D, that's going to bring me into dynamic subdivision, and it's what you know what I always use when I'm using Zmodeler. It's like using a turbo smooth in 3ds Max or smooth preview in Maya. It's just a preview, so you can get in or out. You're not I generally then would use the traditional subdivisions after I've finished everything. So it all depends, you get used to when to use which one. So that can be found in geometry and dynamic subdiv, and I just have this stuff up here. Well, it's just this here, the amount of subdivisions that you can put onto it. So usually set that to 5, so that's where that can be found, and then just D to go back out of it. So if we take a look at our reference here, the first thing I want to do is just to chamfer off this top face. So there's a couple of different ways you can do that with Zmodeler. So I'm just going to spacebar in a face, and I'm going to use polygroup island as the target. I could also use flat island and bevel, sorry, not face, edge. So bevel, edge loop complete, and then we can just bevel that edge to give us that transition there on the surface here. It's a sharp kind of a bevel. So the other way you could do that with Zmodeler, if I just undo that, is you could go to inset, inset region, polygroup or flat island, and then you can just inset that, and then you can just move that up. So I could just go to move a polygroup island in this case, and just click on that, and you can drag that up. That'll drag up straight along the normals. So that's just two ways of doing that. So I'm just going to bevel that again slightly. So the next thing to do then is I want to just talk about the crease tools. I have all the crease tools here. They can also be found in geometry, crease, and here are all the crease tools here. And they're all, I'm always using them when I'm modeling with Zmodeler. So or whatever type of modeling, so I always have them handy here. So crease polygroup is going to crease around the border of each polygroup, and now if I press D to go into dynamic subdivision, you can see that it's maintained hard edges, and the reason why this is smoothed out here is because if you look closely, these little dotted lines are the creases. There's no crease in here. So if I hover over an edge, crease, edge, crease it, press D again, excuse me, you can see now that that has hardened that up. But that's not what we want, because looking at the reference here, it's rounded here, so we don't want it creased on the corner. So you can see here I have symmetry on in X, so if I turn that on in Z as well, I only have to click Alt click one edge because of symmetry now on X and Z, so it's going to operate on the 4 at the same time. And D again, and now you see we've rounded that out, but it's rounded out too much. So this is a case where you'd put some control or inline edges in to tighten up when it's subdivided, so that there's more tension here. So, or there's less tension because there's more topology here, and it's easier to control. The algorithm doesn't have to do as much work basically, because it's trying to work out between here and here, and there's not much topology helping it out in the middle. So that's what control edges basically are. Excuse me. So I'm going to hover over an edge, insert single edge loop, and then you can insert it here with your symmetry still on, or else you can turn it on, and then this is our control cage. It's the same as you'd have in a 3D modeling package, and then we can preview that while we use the tool and interactively kind of get an idea how much rounding out. You just have to be careful, like if you go in too tight, that edge now is right up here and it's sitting on top of the other edge, which isn't good. So we put one in there and in there and get a look at that. And that's not too bad. It could be probably tighter, so I'll just space them out a bit more, or not tighter, sorry, more rounded. So yeah, I'll just space them out a bit more. So the next thing to do now is I'm going to leave this part for another video, and I'm just going to continue on down with the underside of the base. So I'm just going to use the clip curve again and maybe bring that up to about there. And now what we can do is, if you come under to the underside of the geometry, Q mesh a polygroup island or a flat island, and start the Q mesh, but then hold control, and you can see that breaks that away into its own kind of element. I can just pull it away a small bit and then Q mesh down again, and I'm just eyeballing this off my other monitor, so you know, maybe that's too much. So the other modifier key, as well as control with Q mesh, is to just start Q meshing, and instead of actually Q meshing, if you hold shift you can just move. So I might bring it in a bit more, and now just gonna inset region and polygroup island or flat island. So I'll inset that a small bit, Q mesh polygroup island, and Q mesh it down. then I'm going to bevel, or not going to bevel actually, I'm going to show a trick with the, not a trick, but beveling creases. That's just an effect I like. So now I'm going to crease, I'm going to take the crease tolerance down under 90, because this is all, apart from this bevel, 90-degree corners. So you can do a global sort of a crease and take the crease level down to 3, I usually do. And now if I hit crease, remember all these tools in the crease menu, you can see here any corners that fall within that 90-degree, or sorry, 70-degree threshold, which is angles that are over 70 degrees, which all of these are, bar the bevels, are going to be creased. And now the crease threshold, or sorry, the crease level is basically, there's a correlation between the crease level and the subdivision level. So if I have a crease level set to 1 or 0 even, and you can see there's effectively no creasing. If I set it to 1, it's going to subdivide one level with the creasing on, and then after that level it's going to subdivide with no creasing. And I think you get the idea. D to go into the dynamic subdivision, and I'm at 5 here, so that's a difference of 2 levels. So I usually like to work with 3 and 5. The other way to do it is to subdivide down here. It's the older kind of way to do it before dynamic subdivision. You can turn off smooth, or so you can crease, subdivide a couple of times, uncrease everything, and then subdivide again. So that's just the other method of doing it. So when I did that global crease, it creased these again. So you know, just get used to that, going in and out and creasing and uncreasing. Our symmetry's still on, so I can crease and just click. Remember, these edges now are creased as well, so I'm alt clicking here, and symmetry's still on, so it's working on the 4 corners. And now we can just grab, I'm just going to mask this area here, and then I can control click to invert the mask, and there is a slight gap between that and the reference. You can see here there's a gap, so I'm just going to use that to my advantage here, because we're getting these kind of soft bevels. And when creating assets for game, for baking, basically for baking normal maps, or even just for MIP mapping and things like that, which I'll probably do a video on in the future, won't go into it now, but basically you want to have soft bevels here rather than the real world counterparts where these would be much sharper, crisper edges. But for game assets you want to have softer edges, because when you bake them down, like a lot of game things might be viewed from out here, so it might only be getting 1 or 2 pixels on the screen, so it won't be readable. Whereas, you know, so the softer it is, the more readable it is from a distance, and also it can look a lot better on the normal map rather than it just looking like 90-degree corners, which would look like it didn't have a normal map. So that's basically the theory behind that. Keeping your bevels softer. So the bottom, then, it looks like I can't really see, but I think there's just 4, and I certainly can't remember because it's too long ago. I think there's 4 little pads underneath. So a quick way to do them would be just to add an insert brush. So you just press B, I for insert, and then insert cylinder, and then we could just insert here. And because we have our symmetry on, and it gives me an excuse to show something else in ZBrush. So when you create this insert cylinder, it has all these edge loops that we don't want. It doesn't matter in the high poly, but for the low poly, because when you're creating low poly assets, there's different ways to do it, different workflows, and I'm going to show another video on that, go into it in more detail. But basically, you know, some people start from the high poly and retopologize for the low poly. A lot of the times for these hard surface stuff, I don't see the point in that, so I'll create the low poly first, and then I'll be using subdivision techniques. So I already have the low poly then, and it's just a little bit of optimization or cleanup maybe, or edge loops to put in or out, and it's much quicker because you practically have the model already created, especially for hard surface stuff, rather than going in and completely having to retopologize the whole lot. It gives you a good head start, and it's much quicker than completely rebuilding it. So if we come down to geometry here and edge loop, and what I'm going to do is split mask the points. So now that's broken these away to their own subtool here, you can see. So back to geometry, edge loops, and then down the end here, delete loops. And you can see what it does is it gets rid of any loops that aren't contributing to the surface or the silhouette. So I can just delete them because they're not needed. Now these could be much lower poly, so I'd recommend, you know, if you were going to just use these as the low poly, to just create your own insert brush. And an easy way to do that is just to create a cylinder or whatever you happen to be using as your insert brush, down to initialize, and then you can set your, we'll say I only want it to be 12, and set this down to 3, and it's quite low poly, but you're not really going to see it because it's underneath. But just for the sake of, you know, let's say we wanted it in the model. So then this is still in ZBrush primitive, so you can't actually really work on it, so you need to convert it to a polymesh 3D, and now you'll see it'll change color, it'll get its poly group, and then you know it's a polymesh 3D. So same thing again, clip curve, and then we might want to just Zmodeler, and we might want to just bevel, edge loop complete. What I'll do actually is I'll go to a Q mesh, poly group, poly loop, and the direction of your poly group and through poly loop is going to be determined by this little orange widget. So if I'm facing this way, it's going to do it that way. Facing this way, it's going to do it that way. So we can just poly group that, crease by poly groups, and now if I press subdivide, and I'm going to drop this down to 3 again, put this up to 5. So let's say, you know, that was too sharp. Well, you can come in with bevel edge loop complete, and then you can customize that. But one thing to know, this is a technique I like using. Once I've creased everything, I can, you know, go into different edges and put a softer or harder bevel on them. So if you just turn off dynamic subdivision, you'll see that it's replaced the crease with that bevel. So if I put the crease tolerance back up again, DD, now we have a harder crease, and start to bevel it, you've more control, then even more control. So let's say we're happy with that, and we know it's all, you know, it's good for subdividing because we've tested it out. And let's say that's going to be the little button underneath the foot of the joystick. We'll say what you want to do then is come to your front view across X. So I've created this in the top view. You can see here there's Y up, but whatever way your canvas is oriented in relation to your subtool, or sorry, your potential insert mesh that you're going to create, is the way it's going to be drawn out on the normals of the mesh that you're inserting it into. So you can just press B, create insert brush, and it'll ask you, do you want to append it to the brush you're already using, or make a new one. So I can just make a new one. And if you want to have a multi-mesh brush, an IMM brush, you can just append it and create loads of bits and bobs and just append them all to the same brush and then save it. So I'm going to say new, and now if I go back to our joystick, subtool, and I'm going to delete these, yes, and our new insert is still active, and then we can just draw it in, and now we don't have to worry about I'm just actually going to move that into position. It's still, instead of splitting it off to its own subtool, which you can always do later on before bake or whatever, I'm going to leave it there, and then when I subdivide, it's going to be taken along. And what I want to do first is just move it in a bit more, so I can turn on subdivision and place it kind of more accurately. And let's say there is good. So that's pretty much the base done, you know. So I know this is extremely basic and simple, but this is the first, obviously, in this series of game asset sort of creation, and I wanted to really start off with basic stuff. This will probably just be a modeling tutorial, but I will have other ones where I'll unwrap them, I'll bake them, maybe into Substance Painter, into Texture them, and then maybe into Unreal Engine. So that's stuff that I've kind of planned for the future, but for the moment I'm just going to create this joystick, and that's the base. Right then, I hope this was helpful and slightly interesting, and hope to see you in part 2. Alright, cheers, thanks, good luck.